Hello and welcome back to Landlord Law Basics. This is a series of short videos looking at landlord and tenant law in England and Wales in the United Kingdom. I'm Tessa Shepperson and today I'm going to be looking at how you create a tenancy. Now you may say that's fairly obvious, you create a tenancy by signing a tenancy agreement. Well, that is to a certain extent the case, but not necessarily. Now in the last video we talked about the Law Property Act 1925, and I want to go back to the Law Property Act because the Law Property Act talks about what you need to do to create a tenancy. So first of all it says in section 54(1), no interest in land can be created or disposed of except by writing, signed by the person creating or conveying the same, or by his agent thereunto lawfully authorised in writing. So basically, to create a legal interest in land, you've got to have a document in writing which normally needs to be by deed. And when you have a document which is by deed, that means it has to be signed as a deed and it needs to be witnessed. So that's the proper way to create a tenancy. However, you can create a tenancy just by going in and living in the property without signing any sort of document at all. So how is that? The reason for that is the Law Property Act 1925, section 54(2). And what that says is as follows: nothing in the foregoing provisions of this part of the Act, so that's talking about the section that I just read out, shall affect, and then it gives a number of things. It says the creation by parole. Now what that means is that if you're creating something without a document in writing, of leases taking effect in possession. So that means, it normally means if you go in and start living there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually living there. It means that you've got the right to live there. And then, an important one, for a term not exceeding 3 years, whether or not the lessee is given power to extend the term. So that means that the period of time that is agreed must be not more than 3 years. So if you've got if you've got an agreement for 6 months, or often when you create a tenancy under this section, you will go in and you'll start paying rent on a month-by-month basis. So the term will be a periodic one. It'll go from month to month. So that means that's why you can stay in a property for 30 years, even though it wasn't created by a deed. So for a term not exceeding 3 years, whether or not it continues on afterwards, at the best rent which can reasonably be obtained. Now normally if you pay something that will be sufficient. It doesn't actually have to be a market rent, but you need to make a payment or possibly do something that is money's worth. There's a very old rule that says that you can create a tenancy at what's called a peppercorn rent. Now when people created peppercorn rents, pepper was a lot more valuable than it is now, but peppercorn rent is a term used for when you're creating a tenancy and where the rent is something that's quite small, but it has to be something. And then the final thing is without taking a fine. Now a fine is a payment for a lease or a payment for a tenancy. Now when you have a long lease, you normally pay often a fairly large amount of money, sometimes a massive amount of money for. So I mean, if you buy a one-bedroom flat in Mayfair, I mean that could set you back £1 million. And that will be a fine because you're making a payment for a lease. And then the lease will also involve a payment of ground rent. For a short let, for a tenancy, we don't pay a fine, and the main income of the landlord is from the rent. So if you are creating a tenancy without a document, without a deed, then it is, if they move in, if the term is not more than 3 years, at a reasonable rent, and without taking a payment in advance. So what this means is that if you move into a property on a handshake and you start paying monthly rent, you've got a proper tenancy. The landlord can't turn around and say to you that you don't have a tenancy, you have some sort of provisional agreement. It is a proper tenancy and you get all the rights of a tenant. Thank you for watching. I'll be back again shortly with another Tenant Law Basics video.